Hey everyone, it's Max, the Red Mage Eldena Doublecast, coming to you with a special bonus clip from Max and RWBY. This is a clip that we recorded as part of the Volume 5 episode, but that episode ended up running really, really long, and so in an effort to make it a marginally more reasonable length, I decided to section this discussion off into its own video, since it really doesn't have anything to do with Volume 5. It was only in this recording session because it's following up on things we talked about in Volume 4. So that's what's up with this clip. I hope you enjoy this fun little discussion we had about early RWBY animation and why it looks so janky sometimes. Also, before we move on, this isn't really an error or omission because this isn't like a comment correcting me on something. This was something that we sort of did on our own time, and by we, I mean, Pug and Ali. Basically...
This is just Max trying to get me and Pug to cry.
Yes, that's exactly...
So early on in the podcast. So early on, Max.
That is exactly what this is. This is me trying to trigger the animation people. Basically...
Max's Twitter name right now is Playblasts Publisher. Every time I see it, it's like a very triggering experience.
Yeah, I muted him. So
oh, that's how you know you're doing something right, when your friends mute you. Right, okay, so for context, in the last episode, I briefly mentioned during a segment on how, like, on the switch over to Maya, that the first two volumes of RWBY were not rendered, they were playblasts. And I don't think we properly explained this. Pug, what is a playblast?
a playblast is a pre-render. That's usually something I would kick out for a continuity review. So it doesn't have all of the lovely things that a render would have. It doesn't have anti-aliasing. It usually doesn't have all of the lighting in it. It's really something where you're not looking at it for the final render. You're just looking at it for, like, do we like this animation? Do we like this pose she goes into? Do we like what we did with the previous shot into the next shot? So it's something that we use internally for reviews. It is absolutely not something to be put into a final product.
Right. So for example, if you've ever gotten like the DVD for a Pixar movie and you watch the bonus features where they'll have like deleted scenes, some of the deleted scenes will look like super unfinished. Those are probably playblasts.
Mm-hmm. Everything just looks like flatter because there's no lighting to it. So there's a lot less depth to characters. There's just like there's no atmosphere because you can't get lighting or like effects in there. Sometimes characters, I don't think this is the case for RWBY, but if you notice like in some of like the behind the scenes for like Pixar or Disney stuff, characters will look like they're just wearing like a bodysuit. That's because the clothes are done like with effects afterwards, not by like hand animation sometimes.
Right. But yeah, all of RWBY Volume 1 and 2 was just playblasts. There was no rendering.
Wow. God.
Now
that panel was so hard to watch.
Yeah,
and you have the clip here of like the body doing like the boob thing. That was just like
cringe,
gross, and like not what I wanted to see at all.
People forget how like dude bro-y early RWBY's audience was, because it was all like,
well, the entire company's audience was just dude broy. Like RWBY is actually responsible for bringing in like a new audience, like mostly a female audience, and like younger women to their company.
Yeah,
that's very true.
It was all like epic Call of Duty gamers. Like that's who Rooster Teeth's audience was before this. Right, okay, so what we're talking about here is that after I made that comment about early RWBY being all playblasts and, thoroughly destroyed Pug and Ali's brains, they had to do some research into this, and Pug dug up a panel that Monty did in 2013 at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, where he basically explained the animation process for RWBY and did even a little demo showing, like, how he works in Poser. So a few things we ascertained from this. First, as previously mentioned, it's all playblast, there's no rendering. The way that they got around this because there is no lighting, is that all of like the
I mean, did they though?
got him. All of the shadows and lighting and like anything you see in those first 2 volumes that looks like it could be lighting related is just painted onto the character models themselves.
God.
Apparently there were some things that were added in. What they would do is, so he would like export a Playblast and then import it into Adobe Premiere and then like add effects and anti-aliasing in there, or like in After Effects, something like that. But none of it.
I mean, that's not uncommon. A lot of the shows I work on, you know, we base in Maya and then the effects department works in After Effects, or we base in 3ds Max and the company works in After Effects. But yeah, that's just like using 2 programs not the way they were intended for a shitty result. So
yes.
And it's usually done with renders, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. I mean that's a full size render going into the effects department.
Basically, you're not using After Effects and Premiere to compensate for there not being a render. It's used in addition to the render to like add the finishing touches, basically.
Correct.
Right.
It's also harder to just add effects with a Playblast because you're getting like one video file. With renders, you can spit out like different video files that just has like the character on it or just has the background in it.
Yep.
But with a Playblast, you're only getting one video file with everything on like one layer. So you can't like layer effects in the background or like correct like things only in the background or only the character. You have to do everything on the same layer, which is not a smart way to work in After Effects either.
No.
Correct. Absolutely. My effects artists have like lists of the sorts of renders they want before they go into the file from the L&R artist, because they want to layer things. They want to make it look dimensional.
So some of you, including Pug and Ali, might be wondering, why? Why did he do this? Was he just that emotionally attached to Poser that he had to do this entire show in this program? And like what? Why the Playblast even? Why not render it? Well, according to Monty, most of these decisions were made in the interest of saving time. So the logic here, so for example, Playblasting instead of rendering, if you want to Playblast a 12-minute animation, that takes about 12 minutes. But if you want to render a 12-minute animation, that takes a lot longer than 12 minutes. And so that's time that you could be using to do other things. Out of curiosity, how long does it take if it like actually looks good to render a 12-minute animation?
I have put things on high priority on the farm that were about 4 minutes that have taken 72 hours.
Okay, like, that is a pretty significant time saving, so I like almost see where he's coming from. But
it's like 72 hours sitting on the farm while you do other things. It's not like you're babysitting it. I mean, ideally you have a render wrangler who is looking at the entirety of the farm and making sure that if frames need to be recued, they're resent correctly. But the artist, once it's sitting on the farm, you know, you're working on another shot. And especially long renders, you traditionally do them over the weekend, so it's not occupying anyone's time.
Gotcha.
I feel like part of it is like Monty might just not have known how to light or render, and he didn't want to learn how to light or render for this. Honestly, like, I don't know how much of it could potentially be that, but because Monty is such like an animation person, I feel like part of it might have been he's just like didn't see the value in it.
I agree.
And like the Rooster Teeth staff before, like had talked about how obsessed he was like with saving time. Like that was actually like it was a huge thing of his. He like efficiency. So like to the point that they had some bit where they were like, yeah, he figured out like if something was 2 minutes on the microwave, like you're supposed to cook it for 2 minutes, he would minimize that to a number he could press the same amount of times and then enter so that it would be like quicker. He would save like a second than pressing like 3 different buttons or something. It was pretty wild. So he was definitely known for that.
Like entirely self-taught, right?
Yes. He was a high school dropout who taught himself poser at like his school's computer lab, is what he said, which is really fascinating and like honestly respect, because that's very impressive.
I mean, in addition to saving time, I would say the biggest factor for this is probably saving money. I mean,
definitely.
Not having an L&R department, not having a farm, not paying for renders, not paying for render wranglers, just going from animation to comp, cutting out potentially the most expensive part of your pipeline. If you're making a show with $4, I still wouldn't cut L&R, because I think it is one of the most important steps that you go through. Obviously, producing renders for your animated show is important, but yeah, I want to give the benefit of the doubt and just say like, oh, we went to the line producer and we needed to cut, make a huge budget cut, and this was the choice we made. But watching this panel, I agree. It really just sounds like it was something that was not in his wheelhouse, and he was not ready to learn or hire someone else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was really about keeping RWBY in his court and being able to start to finish shots entirely by himself.
And if that saves them thousands of dollars, 2 birds with 1 stone.
Correct.
Speaking of animation models, I put this in the doc, but can I ask it now, or did you have it planned out later, Max?
Oh, just go ahead.
Okay, so I had a question for the animation people, because especially with the volume 4 costume changes, I noticed that a lot of the models have like something around their neck, whether it be like a scarf or a high collar or whatever's around Oscar's neck. Is there like a reason for doing that, like modeling wise, that you would want to conceal where like the head connects to the body? Or is that just like a stylistic choice, do you think?
Yeah, this is actually a huge trick in 2D animation more than 3D animation. You make the bow, the tie, the scarf, or whatever, a hard point, so that when you're showing the character talking, all you have to do is animate their head, animate their eyes and their mouth, as opposed to having to animate the neck and the shoulders and potentially the entire body. I think Looney Tunes is really popularized this technique because it's so much easier when you're to just focus on the character talking, as opposed to having to keep the whole body alive. With 3D animation, it's a little, I don't want to say silly, but it's not a technique we see as often. But yeah, it's definitely just when you're going in on those close-up shots of people talking that you don't have to worry about everything else, and you can just say like, oh, the scarf is my hard point and I'm not animating anything beneath it.
Oh, okay, so it is a shortcut.
Yes.
Interesting.
One other thing, and this is related to the whole like efficiency thing, is that the reason why he chose to use Poser instead of like industry standard software, the way that he described it, he was like, yeah, like I've worked at a few game companies and they had me working in Maya or 3ds Max or whatever. And he's like, and those programs are obviously better, like just in every way, than Poser. But the way he put it is, our options were, we could make the show look good or we could finish it. And he wanted to finish it, and so he chose Poser. And his logic here is that Poser basically offered him a lot of like shortcuts that I guess aren't readily available in Maya or 3ds Max. Like the examples he used is that Poser is like ridiculously backwards compatible. So he basically was talking about how, like, for example, Yang's animations, when she's like doing like a series of like punches and kicks, he could pull.
Well, you can. Yeah. So you're talking about the pose library, right?
Yes.
Because you can do something like that in Maya also.
Yes, you definitely can.
That's totally possible in Maya also.
I think it's because he had like a huge library of these fight animations saved up from Dead Fantasy and Haloid. And so he liked being able to just pull those out whenever he wanted, and he didn't want to like recreate them all in Maya.
I would find it hard to believe that you couldn't move those into Maya, but again, that is time you take out of pre-production, is moving your library over.
One thing I heard when I was watching another panel was that one of the really big reasons they moved to Maya was because of scaling, which that might have been why they couldn't transfer animations over. So if scaling was an issue using Poser, I imagine everything was like super duper small, which is probably why it's like a previs software. And if the scale is all off for the animations, that could potentially be why they couldn't transfer them over to Maya. But I can't say for sure.
Gotcha. And then as a final note, because we've already spent like a pretty long time talking about this, and this is supposed to be the Volume 5 episode, but I don't know, this was just like blowing my mind a little bit, so I wanted to like spend
Me
some
too.
time on it. Last note is that I said that Poser was a previs software, like they used it for like planning, essentially like in between storyboarding and animation. Based on what I saw in that panel and the research I did independently, I couldn't find a source that said it's used for previs. I think what it's actually for is that Poser was just like, it's designed to be like an amateur animation software that like first time animators with like no experience and no training can just jump into and sort of learn as they go. Like it's just supposed to be like an easy to use animation software for beginners. But like in terms of professional applications and in terms of like people who actually publish stuff with it, the only things I could find is people were talking about like very low budget graphics departments for some shows. Like shows where like the graphics can look bad and that's just okay. And something Monty himself mentioned in this panel, which is that, as he put it, like something like 90% of the people who did use Poser, even for just like their own like independent projects, were just making porn. They were making like 3D hentai with it.
Yeah, that checks out.
Which like, if you're gonna make 3D hentai, like at least put it in Blender. Like, come on, man. Have some respect.